A very good morning, students. Welcome back to online class on Java programming. In our previous session, we started your first unit and we discussed some of the concept from your first chapter, that is object-oriented development of Java. That is how we do the how we do the program development using objects in Java that we have seen, that we have discussed. So we said in Java programming language, everything is an object. We need to develop the complete program, or we need to develop the complete solution to the given problem in terms of objects only. There is no other mean, there is no other way that we can follow. So if you go and see in uh, C++ programming language, there the things are different. So we have two approaches. I mean, in C++, we can do the structured programming way, or we can do the object-oriented programming way. It is not fully object-oriented programming language, your C++. The reason, there we have functions, isn't it? We have functions. What do you mean by function? It is a block of code. It is a set of code which performs a certain task, isn't it? So in C++, even though you are using classes, even though you are using objects, there must exist at least one function in your program, and that function is nothing but your main function. So without main function, it is not possible to write a C++ program, because the memory allocation, the object creation, everything we are doing inside the main function only. Okay. So because of that reason, we can call the C++ programming language as not a fully object-oriented programming language. Even though it supports classes and objects, it is not a fully object-oriented programming language. But whereas, when we talk about this Java programming, it is a fully object-oriented programming language. And the reason, yes, here we don't have functions. What we said, what is a function? It is an independent set of statements. It is not at all dependent on anything, any of the thing. Like, it is not at all dependent on a class, it is not at all dependent on an object or any other header file, something like that. Okay. But whereas when we talk about a method, it is dependent on a class. Method is nothing but it is a member function. So when you are saying a method, you are indirectly making it as dependent on some other thing. That some other thing is nothing but your class. So inside Java, we use only methods. We cannot put functions. We cannot put independent functions in a Java program. It is highly impossible. So everything you have to include, everything you have to put within a class only. Even the main function, it goes inside a class only. Remember this thing, it is very, very important. Even a main function will go inside a class, and we call that class as public class of our program. So even the main function, that is nothing but here we call it as a main method, because it is not independent right now, isn't it? It is a member function. It is not at all an independent entity. It is a member function. So we have to call it as a method. So a Java's main method, it should go within a class. It cannot stand isolately or independently. Hopefully you understood. So because everything, every single portion of your logic, every single statement of your program, it must go within a class, or what we call it cannot stand independently. We can call your Java as purely object based language, object oriented language. Okay. Hopefully you understood this phenomenon. So structured programs we cannot write in Java. We can write only object-based programs or object-oriented programs in Java. Okay. So quickly go to the next thing. That is, yeah, all these things we discussed. Understanding Java's object-oriented development. Just now, whatever explanation I have given, that whole thing comes over here. And we said Java is an object-oriented programming language. Okay. It is not supporting the concepts of structured programming. Rather, we go in a different approach. We follow a different approach to do the program development, and that different approach is nothing but your object oriented programming approach, object oriented development. Okay, so then we discussed what are classes, what are objects, how an object can be created from a class, and how a class is going to describe an object. So basically inside a class, what we do, we put the complete description about an object, isn't it? So what properties, what logic processing an object is going to have when it is created, all those things are described inside the class only. It is something like a prototype to your object. A class is nothing but it is a we cannot call prototype. Prototype is nothing but it is a working model, isn't it? Class is not at all a working model. It is a plan. It's just an abstract, isn't it? So we can call a class like an abstract to your object. Hopefully you understood. It is not at all a working model. Okay, don't confuse yourself. It is not at all a working model. It is completely a passive entity, a description about the object. Okay, so how a product is going to work when you describe it on a paper, that will become a class. Okay, so the different concepts of your object oriented programming structure, oops, we discussed classes, we discussed objects, we discussed inheritance, polymorphism, abstraction, encapsulation. Okay, the three bottom concepts, that is association, aggregation, and composition, we have not discussed in our previous class. Actually, I forgot to explain those things over there. Okay, we simply went to the next slide, so no issues. Many students raised that point in comments as well as in they texted me personally, so definitely we will discuss these three things over here. So core OOPS concepts, class, already I have given the explanation. It is an abstract object. It is a um, working product, we can say, of a class. So when you create an object, it will have memory, it will have characteristics, it will perform the logic. It will perform the logic. Inheritance, deriving a derived class from a base parent class is nothing but inheritance. Then polymorphism, behaving differently at different scenarios, different locations, different time period. That is nothing but polymorphism. We discussed for all these things. I have given real-time examples. Okay. Then abstraction, hiding the important, hiding the unnecessary details and giving only what is required is nothing but abstraction. Encapsulation, binding different things, I mean more than one thing into a single thing is nothing but encapsulation. So for this also I have given the real-time example, and our class is the best example in terms of coding, how we are going to achieve encapsulation. In the sense, our class is the best example. Inside a class, we are wrapping up of data, member data as well as member functions, that is nothing but methods, okay, into a single entity, that is nothing but your object. So encapsulation using class we are achieving. Then association, see, in object oriented programming, everything is an object, isn't it? Everything an object is an object. So whatever classes, whatever objects you are creating, whatever classes you are writing and using them, whatever objects you are creating, so these objects, they have the of course they are independent stuffs. Objects are independent stuffs, but now they can talk with each other. So if required, the objects can talk with each other, or we can say the objects can have relationships between them. So how these objects, I mean parent to child or one child to another parent child, how these relationships are going to be framed, or how these relationships to what extent these relationships are going to stand, all those concepts comes under association. Okay, association is something, the relationship. Okay, it shows the relationship between the objects. So let us assume I have created a class called um, teacher class, where a teacher is going to have his profession, his ID, his name, his age, his uh, subject which he is teaching, all these things. This is the teacher class. And then the student class, we're also going to have student class. So student, he's also going to have his properties like his ID, his name, his class, his age, okay, his branch, like this. He's also going to have his own characteristics. Okay, so we can have the relationship between the teacher object as well as the student object. Okay, that sort of relationship we call it as an association. And one teacher can teach to many students. It is not compulsory that for every student there must exist a single teacher, isn't it? So one teacher can teach many students. At the same time, one student can get the inputs from multiple teachers, isn't it? One student can get the inputs from multiple teachers. So this sort of relationship we call it as an association. Okay, hopefully you understood. So the next thing, aggregation. Aggregation is nothing but whenever we are creating a class, using that same class we can create many objects, not only a single one. We can create many objects. So let us assume this aggregation and composition relationship to explain. These are also relationships only, aggregation relationship as well as the composition relationship. So to explain this aggregation and composition relationship, um, let us assume same same thing. Um, Take an institution. Inside that institution, we are going to have different departments, isn't it? Different departments like computer science department, electronics department, electrical department. We are going to have different departments, and in those departments, we are going to have the teachers or the faculty, isn't it? Your faculty. So in each department, we are going to have different faculty members. So faculty belonging to ECE department, they, I mean, they work under ECE department only. There is no relationship of them with CSC department. And the faculty belonging to CSC department, they work under CSC department only. There is no relationship of the CSC faculty with ECE department. Of course, sometimes they will teach service subjects in vice versa departments, like CSC department faculty will teach in ECE department. It doesn't mean that they are completely migrating to ECE department. It is not like that. They work under CSC department, but they provide services to the ECE department. So likewise, we can have a relationship, aggregation relationship. Here, all the faculty members. What is department? It is not at all a physical thing, isn't it? A department, it is something like a virtual thing under which all the faculty belonging to ECE department, they are working, isn't it? So this sort of aggregation, what we are framing, because we are aggregating all the faculty members belonging to ECE department using that department entity. Okay, so if you if you destroy the department, let us assume we are completely destroying the ECE department. Does it mean we are destroying the teachers or the faculty members? No, they can work freely. Department, it is something like a virtual entity which we have destroyed. Even after destruction of the department, the faculty members, the faculty objects can survive and can work. So this sort of relationship, this sort of technique, if you are implementing, where even after the destruction of the parent class, the child classes are existing, we call it as an aggregation. Okay. First thing, association I have explained, where we are establishing the relationship between the objects. So I have taken the example of teacher student. So we said one teacher can teach to many students, as well as one student can take the inputs from many teachers. So this sort of relationship we said association. Now aggregation, parent to child. Under a department we have created many faculties. Destruction of the department should not affect the faculty objects. Destruction of the department object or department class should not affect the faculty objects. So if you have that sort of relationship, we call it as an aggregation. So we are aggregating, and that aggregation how we are doing, independent to parent and child. Even the destruction of parent should not affect the child's. Okay, so if you are doing this sort of implementation, we called it as the aggregation, where children are completely independent of parent. Destruction of children, I mean destruction of parent should not affect children. Okay, so next to the composition relationship. What is composition? It is same like the previous example, aggregation, where the destruction of parent should affect the children. Okay, if you destroy the parent class or parent object, the child classes which fall under that parent should also get destroyed. I will give you the one simple example. See, here also the same thing. Take the example of a house. Take the example of a house. So here, over here, under a house, we can have many rooms, isn't it? We can have many rooms. You can subdivide the house area with the help of walls, and we call each of these subdivided area as a room. So inside a house, we can have many rooms. Okay, we can have many rooms. One room belonging to one house, it cannot be a part of other house, isn't it? It cannot be, it is impossible, highly impossible. We cannot make one single room as a part of two different houses, isn't it? So same thing, like how a faculty belonging to one department, he cannot be a part of another department. In that same way, we are focusing the relationship over here. How we discussed the example in aggregation, the same way we are discussing the example in in composition. So a big house, we have subdivided that house into many rooms. Under that house, all these rooms are falling, or we can say the collection of all these rooms are nothing but the house, isn't it? So over there also same thing, collection of all the faculty members belonging to ECE department is nothing but ECE department. Okay, so here if you destroy the house, ultimately what will happen? Rooms also gets destroyed. Destroying the house is nothing but destroying the rooms as well. So if this sort of relationship, if you are making inside your Java program, we call it as a composition. Hope you understood. Association, aggregation, composition. A bit tricky concepts, but you have to understand. Okay. So association, having the relationship between the objects without affecting each other. Aggregation, having the relationship between the objects, parent to child, but destruction of the parent should not affect child over here. Next, composition, it is also same thing, having the relationship between parent to child, destruction of parent should affect child as well. Okay, so next thing we discussed, advantages of object oriented programming structure. So to discuss these advantages, we have taken the example, help of structured programming. The reason for going for structured programming is very simple, because whenever we are talking about the advantages of something, we need to compare that thing with some other thing. So here, when we are talking about the advantages of object-oriented programming, we are comparing this object-oriented programming with structured programming. So whatever problems we have in structured programming, those things we are making as advantages in object-oriented programming, because we are overcoming all those things, isn't it? We have a bottom-up approach, there we have top-down approach. Okay, there we don't have any concepts, any security issues, and we are focusing more on data. Here we have there we have security issues, and we are focusing more on logic, not data. Here we don't have any security issues, and we are focusing more on data. there is no reusability concept. Here we can achieve reusability to a greater level. Okay, so all these things we discussed, the differences between structured programming and object oriented programming, and whatever we are narrating over here inside this object oriented programming, the points, those things will become the advantages of object oriented programming. Don't think that these are something other than that. These things, all these points, I mean this point, whatever we have discussed over here, you can also write these points as benefits of object oriented programming. So when you do compare these things with structured programming, and the difference what you are seeing here, we are discussing the problems, and here we are discussing the solutions, the techniques, how we are overcoming those problems. So ultimately what will happen, these solutions will become benefits of object oriented programming. Next we have the history of Java programming, from where it actually started, and how it got popularity in the market. All those things we discuss over here. So it is conceived, I mean it is initially developed by five different people, five different programmers. Okay, James Gosling, Patrick Norton, Chris Watt, Ed Frank, and Mike Sheridan. So these five people, they used to work for Sun Microsystems. It is an organization. Sun Microsystem is an organization, or we can say it is a company for developing the software projects. Okay, so in the year 1991, okay, in the year 1991, they developed this Java programming. Okay, so this first point, as a Viva question, you have to remember. So who developed Java programming, in the sense it is not the work of a single person, like how we give the entire credit to Dennis Ritchie for the development of C language. Here not like that. Here it is a group of people, combination of people, more than one people. It was conceived in the year 1991 at Sun Microsystems um, company or organization by five different people. Their names are James Gosling, Patrick Norton, Chris Worth, Ed Frank, and Mike Sheridan. So these five people are responsible for the development of Java programming. So it is not a single day job or a single month job. It took around 18 months, okay, for developing this first working version of Java programming. Okay, it took around 18 months. So the language was initially called as Oak. Okay, later it renamed to Java in the year 1995. But when they have developed the first working version in the year 1991, they called it as Oak. It is not Java programming, it is not Java at that time. They called it as Oak. So later it got renamed to Java in the year 1995. Okay, between the initial implementation of Oak in the year 1992 and the public announcement of Java in the year 1995, many people contributed the design and evolution of the language. So not only these five people, but there are some other people, those who have given their contribution, their effort in the development of this Java programming language. Okay, one such person, one such scientist, or we can say one such researcher, his name is Bill Joy. Okay, the author of Bill Joy, Arthur Van Hoff, Jonathan Payne, Frank Yellin, and Tim Lindholm. So there are different names, it is very difficult to pronounce. Okay, these people were the key contributors. After these five people, these people also contributed their effort and their knowledge in the development or in the process of this Java programming. Okay, so yes, uh, after the contribution of efforts by those different people, how the development took place that we have to discuss. So much of Java is inherited from two different languages, that is C and C++. So as much of Java is inherited from these two languages, if you know the syntax, if you know the semantics of C and C++, if you know how to write a program in C and C++, it will become very easy for you to write a program in Java. You hardly need to do any work in order to write the program in Java. Or we can say, if I write the first program of Java, you can easily understand that one. Okay. So because Java will take much of the syntax and semantics from C and C++. Okay. From C, Java derives the syntax, and from C++, it takes the object-oriented features. So whatever object-oriented features like classes, objects, inheritance, encapsulation, polymorphism, all these things we discussed in abstraction, all these things we discussed in C++ as well. So the concept of object-oriented features, Java will take from C++, and the syntax for using different programming constructs, like we are using control structures, we are using arrays, we are using pointers. There are no pointers basically in Java. So whatever programming constructs we used in C, the same syntax we follow in C++ as well as in Java. So here we are saying Java is inherited from two different programming languages. They are C and C++. Java will take the syntax from C language, and Java will take the object-oriented features from C++ programming language. Okay. Java was primarily designed with a motivation to develop a platform independent language. Architecture neutral. Platform independent is nothing but architecture neutral. Very soon we discuss what is platform independent, what is architecture neutral in our next discussion. I mean, very next discussion, that is Java's buzzwords. Okay. So Java was designed with a motivation in the mind to develop a platform independent programming language, because at that time when the development of Java was going on, we were having many different languages. It was not the first language which got developed. Prior to the Java also, we have many different programming languages, many different computer languages. But all those programming languages, all those computer languages are bound to a single computer only. Okay. So we can give instructions, we can give commands using those programming languages to a system of a variety type. A single type, not a variety type, sorry. To a system of a single type. So to give instructions, to give commands to a variety of computers, different computers, yes, we have to use that same language, but we have to code, we have to narrate, we have to run and execute in all the variety of systems. So that type of problem, that type of drawback was there. I mean, basically, if I mean to say is those languages are not architecture neutral, or those languages are not portable. Because of that reason, there is a need to develop a language where we can write a program in one computer and we can execute that program in all other computers without even bothering about a single instruction written in your program. So if you have that sort of technique, we can call that language as an architecture neutral language or platform independent language, and Java is one such. Hopefully you understood. Okay. So if you read the further statement, I mean continuation in that seventh point. So Java was designed with a motivation to develop an architecture neutral language or platform independent language that could be used to create software for many customer electronics like microwave ovens and remote controls. So basically they did not thought of writing the programs for internet. So they thought of writing programs, small scale programs, lightweight programs for microwave ovens and remote controls. Okay. For that purpose only they developed this Java language. But later what has happened, internet boom has came into existence in the year 1990s. 90s only we got the internet. Okay. So when internet came, I mean internet boom has come, so ultimately what was happened, the need for a lightweight, because bandwidth was very limited at that point. At that point when internet was at its inception level, okay, conception level. So at that time bandwidth was the limiting point. We hardly had like bandwidth size in kilobytes, okay, in bytes and kilobytes. So with that, I mean limited bandwidth, if you write a program and if you try to transfer that program of MB size, it will take enormous amount of computer resources or internet resources, isn't it? So there comes the importance of Java programming, which is used to develop the lightweight programs. So if a programming language is developing lightweight programs, we can easily transfer those lightweight programs over the internet, and we can execute those programs from one computer to the another computer, isn't it? So but later with the invention of World Wide Web, that is nothing but internet, the language was adapted to implement web applications as well, because where the size and portability of the content matters, okay, because the internet bandwidth is limited, okay, there was always the need for lightweight applications, lightweight web applications, lightweight computer programs. So Java was the language which was used to develop the lightweight applications for microwaves and remote controls. So later they used the same Java language to develop the web applications as well, which web applications which works over the internet. Hopefully you understood. Okay, so next the Java buzzwords, and with this discussion we stop our lecture. So these Java buzzwords, they are the key considerations, are the key contributors for adopting or for taking the Java language for our program development, for our software development. So simply if somebody will ask you why we have to go for Java, in the sense you have to explain, I mean you have to give this Java buzzwords as example. Okay, so the Java is very simple programming language. Okay, simple when I'm saying, I'm keeping in mind that you people have already completed the prior languages or the basic programming languages like C and C++ in your prior semesters. In your third semester you have completed C++, and in your first semester you have completed C language. Because I'm keeping those two things in my mind, so after learning C and C++, Java will become very simple to you. Okay, it is very simple to learn if you have the knowledge of C and C++. With the prior knowledge of C and C++, learning Java is very simple, very easy. Okay, you hardly give any effort to learn this Java programming. Okay, so the next thing, secure. It is object oriented programming language, so definitely it is going to have the security to a greater level. Okay, to a greater level. Not only the small scale development, but also we can go for large complex program or large complex solutions, problem solutions in this Java programming, because here the collaborative work is possible. Collaborative work, when I'm saying collaborative work, we need to provide the authenticity, we need to provide the confidentiality, so that we can achieve the security. Hopefully you understood. So collaboratively we can work, and to that collaboration we can reveal what content we want to reveal, and we can secure what content we want to secure. Next is portability. This is something like taking the code written in one computer to some other computer. So Java, it is a portable computer language. Okay, so we have a concept called bytecode that very soon we are going to discuss. What is Java's bytecode? So bytecode is something, the uh, intermediate code after the source file, before the execution. Whatever code we have, we call it as bytecode. So the compiled code we can say. Okay, of course Java is both compiled as well as interpreted programming language. So bytecode is something, it is an intermediate code. It is not the uh, source code or not the output. Okay, not the source code, not the output. It is something in between. Okay, so first, in general, whenever we go for computer programs, what we do, using some text editor or using some IDE, we write our program, isn't it? We write our logic implementation using a particular programming language, C, C++, Java, any other programming language you can consider. So in all the programming languages, what we are doing, first we are writing the program, then we are compiling the programs. Compilation, what it will do, it will check for errors. If there are no errors, it will create the object code. In C++ or C language, it will create the object code. That object code, we are integrating with some uh, machine related stuff, machine related information to form the executable code. And once you get the executable code, that executable code you can run on the machine to get the output. To some extent, it is acceptable, because if you have the same architecture, same operating system in some other computer, there also you can transfer that executable file and you can run that executable file to check the output in your C and C++ programming languages. But when it comes to the different architectures, like suppose you are writing a C program in Windows operating system and you are trying to execute that executable file in Linux operating system. Is it possible? Means not possible, because executable code, it will have the machine related information as well, and machine related information of Windows operating system, of Linux operating system, it is entirely different. Okay, because of that reason you cannot execute the executable file generated in Windows platform in Linux platform. So the executable code is completely different from Windows, for Windows platform as well as Linux platform. And what about the mobile operating systems like your Android and iOS? Can we run that same executable code in Android and in what we call iOS? In the sense, again, no, we cannot run. Again, there is a limitation. So there are many different problems when we talk about the our traditional basic level programming languages. Because of that reason, we cannot call the C language or C++ language a portable language, a secure language, a simple language. Okay, so all these characteristics or all these considerations we have in Java. Java is simple, Java is secure, and Java is portable. So here in Java, what we do, we write the source code. We convert that source code. When we do the compilation of Java source code, we will get a code called bytecode. Once the Java source code compiled successfully, means we will get the bytecode. That bytecode is completely independent of machine's architecture. That bytecode is completely independent of machine's architecture, that you can copy from one computer. Bytecode you can copy from one computer to other computer, and you can execute that bytecode in many different computers, like even if it is Windows platform, even if it is Linux platform, even if it is Android platform, whatever is the platform, your um, bytecode, it doesn't bother about it. It will simply execute itself and it will generate the output for you. Hopefully you understood. Okay, so because of these reasons, we are going for this Java programming. Okay, so portability, bytecode. In order to execute that bytecode, we need again, we need a simple what we call a lightweight tool. We call it as JVM, Java Virtual Machine. So if you have written the source code, you got the bytecode. To execute this bytecode and to get the output, we need JVM. So in all different computers, so you have written the code in Windows, you have generated the bytecode in Windows, and you're transferring that bytecode into Linux environment. There also you need JVM to get the output from that bytecode. So This is the only condition, that you need to have the proper JVM in all other machines. Even I mean, we are not talking about the architecture now. Whatever the computer architecture is, whatever RAM it is having, whatever processor it is having, whatever operating system it is having, we don't bother about these things. We bother about only the JVM, whether those machines are having JVM or not. If those machines are having JVM, that means you can execute your bytecode in every different machine. Hopefully you understood. So that comes under the portability concept. Simple we have discussed, secure we have discussed, and then we also discussed the portable. Okay. Object oriented. Object oriented in the sense as it is going to support all the object oriented principles like your classes, your objects, your inheritance, your polymorphism, your encapsulation, abstraction, okay, uh, composition, aggregation, association. As it is supporting all these additional properties of object oriented programming language, we can call Java as object oriented. And moreover, we said the application development or the program development which we are doing, we have to do everything in terms of classes and objects only. There is no other mean of developing the application. There is no other mean of writing the application. Because of that reason also we call the Java as object oriented programming language. Okay. So next thing is robust. Robust means it is very difficult to break, hack. See, for suppose at some point one Java application is running, and is there any possibility that I can break through into that code? Means no. There are two reasons for that one. The first reason, we are providing a high level of security in our Java program with the help of classes and objects. When we are creating classes, class itself will bind the member functions as well as the data members into a single unit, that we call it as a class. Okay, and when you create the object, it is very difficult to break that object and it is very difficult to get into that object. Okay, so this is the first reason. And the second reason, when you execute your bytecode in JVM, you are providing a second level of security. I will show you how. So quickly I need to open my whiteboard. I have not done that one. So here let us assume I have my bytecode. This is this box. This is my bytecode. Okay, this is my bytecode. So in order to run or in order to execute this bytecode, what I need a JVM. Consider it as JVM. This thing is my JVM. So this is the bytecode and this is your JVM. And this JVM, can I run on the hardware independently? Means no. In order to run this JVM, I need operating system support. In the hardware, I need operating system support, and that operating system is the second layer. Like this. This third layer is your OS. This is JVM. And this is bytecode. So now, here inside the bytecode, we already provided the security with the help of classes and objects. Classes, objects. So all our data members, all our member functions, they are bounded inside these classes and objects. I mean, a level of security we already providing. So the second level of security with the help of JVM we are providing. And the third level of security is the operating system. So a hacker, let us suppose he wants to hack the information which is there inside the class, which is there inside the object. If he wants to hack the information from these classes and objects, what he has to do? first of all, I mean, prior to this operating system also, we are going to have many different network protocols and all. Okay, even if he succeeded in breaking all those network security protocols and all, and finally he came to the operating system, and operating system also, it is going to have his own security. So if he breaks that one, again there is a layer of Java, JVM security, that also he broke. Then finally is having this classes and object related security. So there is a different levels of securities he is having. Before getting the actual data, he is supposed to break all those security levels before reaching your objects. Okay, hope you understood this one. Because of this reason, we are calling Java as robust. It is very difficult to break. Robust. Okay. Suppose if you have a glass uh, thing, if you throw that thing towards the wall, what will happen? It will break, isn't it? Suppose a solid rock, if you take and if you throw that rock towards the wall, does it break? No, it will not break. To the floor also, if you drop a glass thing to the floor, it will definitely break itself. But whereas a rock, if you drop to the floor, it will not break. So why rock is not breaking? In the sense it is robust. And why glass is breaking? In the sense it is not robust. So robust in the sense it with the thing which is very difficult to break in the real world, so we call it as a robust thing. Okay, so that's the reason Java is robust. So there are other points also we have, like multi-threaded, architecture neutral, interpreted, high performance, distributed and dynamic. Those things we will discuss in our next class, because already it is more than 50 minutes, I guess. So we should stop our lecture over here, and I need to give some extra time to you people so that you can complete the assignment and you can submit your attendance. Hopefully you understood the seriousness of this classes. So thank you very much, students.